A significant economic shift recently occurred in Canada, largely unnoticed by the public, involving a drastic reduction in tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Ottawa quietly lowered the import duty on these vehicles from a prohibitive 100% down to a mere 6.1%. Critics in the automotive sector have labeled this move the 6% betrayal, fearing catastrophic damage to domestic manufacturing. This policy reversal was not an isolated economic decision, but the result of intense diplomatic maneuvering and coercion by Beijing. The roots of this capitulation retrace to the G20 summit in Bali, where a tense public confrontation occurred between Justin Trudeau and Xi Jinping. Cameras captured Xi Jinping rebuking the Canadian Prime Minister for leaking details of their private discussions to the media. Following this diplomatic embarrassment, Beijing initiated a strategy of economic leverage targeting key Canadian export sectors. The primary target became Canadian agriculture, specifically the highly valuable canola industry, which relies heavily on the Chinese market. China imposed unwritten bans and severe customs delays on Canadian agricultural products, effectively choking off billions in trade revenue. Faced with mounting pressure from the agricultural lobby and economic losses, the Trudeau administration sought a diplomatic off-ramp. A secret agreement was brokered. China would lift the agricultural blockades in exchange for Canada opening its doors to Chinese EVs. The details of this quid pro quo remained hidden until investigative work by industry leaders brought them to light. Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, was instrumental in uncovering the buried regulatory changes. Volpe discovered a specific customs ruling that allowed Chinese manufacturers to bypass the standard national tariff rate. By classifying their vehicles under a different trade code, Chinese automakers gained access to the 6.1% rate. This regulatory loophole effectively nullified the protective barriers Canada had previously claimed to uphold against subsidized Chinese imports. The revelation sent shockwaves through Ontario's industrial heartland, prompting immediate political backlash from provincial leaders. Ontario Premier Doug Ford publicly condemned the federal government's actions, warning of dire consequences for Canadian workers. Ford argued that sacrificing the auto industry to appease Beijing was a short-sighted mistake with long-term economic implications. The stage was set for an influx of heavily subsidized Chinese electric vehicles, directly threatening North American production lines. The repercussions of this decision extend far beyond Canada's borders, threatening the integrity of the integrated North American automotive market. Under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the three nations are supposed to maintain a united front on trade and tariff policies. While the United States maintains a strict 100% tariff wall against Chinese EVs, Canada has effectively dismantled its own defense. This disparity creates a dangerous backdoor for Chinese manufacturers to flood the North American continent with state-subsidized vehicles. Washington views this misalignment as a significant strategic vulnerability, potentially undermining the effectiveness of American trade sanctions against Beijing. The core economic threat lies in the price disparity. Chinese EVs are manufactured at a cost structure that Western companies cannot match. Brands like BYD are poised to offer vehicles at prices drastically lower than domestic equivalents, creating an uneven playing field. While Canadian consumers might initially welcome cheaper options, the long-term cost is the erosion of the domestic manufacturing base. Analysts describe these vehicles as a modern economic Trojan horse, gaining market dominance through predatory pricing to destroy local competition. This policy directly contradicts the billions of dollars the Trudeau government has pledged to subsidize domestic EV battery plants. Ottawa is simultaneously funding Volkswagen and Stellantis to build local capacity, while inviting their fiercest, state-backed competitors into the market. This incoherent strategy risks turning massive taxpayer investments into stranded assets before the first battery is even produced. The decision appears driven by a desperate need to secure votes in the agricultural prairies rather than sound industrial strategy. By prioritizing canola exports over manufacturing security, Canada has positioned itself as the weak link in the G7 alliance. Beijing's strategy of divide and conquer has proven effective, exploiting Canada's economic dependence to fracture Western trade unity. The mechanism used to enact this tariff drop was a Remission Order, a bureaucratic tool that bypassed parliamentary debate. This allowed the government to alter trade policy quietly, avoiding the public scrutiny that usually accompanies such drastic shifts. Industry stakeholders were left in the dark, discovering the betrayal only after the regulatory framework had already been altered. The speed of implementation was alarming, with supply chains adjusting almost immediately to the new, favorable tariff regime. Ports in Vancouver began seeing an uptick in Chinese automotive shipments, signaling the beginning of the feared market saturation. American trade officials are already scrutinizing Canada's porous border policy with growing alarm and bipartisan criticism. There is a palpable fear that Washington may retaliate by reimposing punishing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. With a mandatory review of the USMCA scheduled for 2026, this dispute threatens to dominate the renegotiation agenda. Canada risks being alienated from the very North American trade bloc it fought so desperately to preserve. The geopolitical reality is that Ottawa cannot simultaneously appease Beijing and maintain the unconditional trust of Washington. Economists warn that this 6% precedent creates a moral hazard, encouraging other sectors to demand similar exemptions. If every foreign trade dispute is resolved by capitulation, Canada's protective tariff schedule becomes effectively meaningless. The structural integrity of the national economy is being traded away piece by piece for temporary diplomatic quiet. Meanwhile, Chinese automakers are rapidly establishing dealership networks and logistics hubs in major Canadian cities. These companies are playing a long game, willing to absorb initial losses to secure unshakable market dominance. Canadian manufacturers are left asking how they can possibly compete against the sovereign treasury of a superpower. The federal government offers no clear answer, only vague assurances about accelerating the national green transition. However, a green transition built entirely on imported technology fails to create lasting domestic wealth or employment. It merely transfers Canadian capital to foreign state-owned enterprises in exchange for depreciating consumer goods. The true legacy of this decision will likely be measured in closed factories and lost industrial expertise. As the first wave of cheap EVs lands, the immediate consumer benefit masks a deeper, systemic economic rot. Canada has effectively signaled to the world that its trade policy is malleable under sufficient foreign pressure. This vulnerability invites further coercion, not just from China, but from other aggressive global economic actors. The 6% betrayal is not just about cars, it is a stark case study in the erosion of sovereignty. Ultimately, Canada may find it has sold its industrial future to buy a temporary, fragile peace for its farmers.